Since Trump's Liberation Day tariffs were implemented last year, US imports from China have collapsed nearly 30%. But one country's setback is another's opportunity. Vietnam, for instance, has earned an emerging market upgrade. Samsung is building a $4 billion semiconductor plant in the north of the country, and Apple has shifted 40% of MacBook production to Vietnam from China. But here's what you might have missed. China's exports to Southeast Asia have actually surged. Chinese firms control 70% of Indonesia's nickel refining capacity, and the US just launched Section 301 investigations into 6 Southeast Asian nations, accusing this entire manufacturing boom of being Chinese goods wearing a Southeast Asian disguise. So today, how China became the factory behind the factories, why US trade law is disintegrating before a critical July deadline, and which financial assets are mispriced for the structural realignment already underway. My name is Guy, and this is Coin Bureau Finance. Now, the China Plus One strategy was supposed to be beautifully simple. Companies diversify their manufacturing footprint out of China to reduce geopolitical exposure. Southeast Asia absorbs the displaced capacity, and everybody from Cupertino to Capitol Hill declares victory over supply chain risk. And the headline numbers look genuinely convincing. Exports from ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, grew approximately 14% year-on-year, more than double the global average, according to McKinsey Global Institute's latest trade geometry report. Vietnam alone pulled in $15.2 billion in registered foreign direct investment in the first quarter of 2026, up nearly 43% year-on-year. The disbursed figure, meaning actual capital that physically entered the country, hit $5.41 billion, the highest first-quarter figure in 5 years. Every boardroom survey tells a similar story of executives scrambling to build resilience into their supply chains. But underneath those headlines, something fundamentally different is happening. China has not lost its role in the global supply chain, but has instead entirely repositioned itself. Fortune magazine described the shift perfectly in March 2026, calling China, quote, the factory to the factories. Instead of exporting finished smartphones and laptops directly to American consumers, China now exports the processors, batteries, memory chips, and other critical subcomponents to Vietnam, Thailand, and Malaysia, where they get snapped together and re-exported with a Made in Southeast Asia label slapped on the box. And the trade data confirms this structural pivot with brutal clarity. ASEAN's collective trade deficit with China has ballooned to roughly $140 billion, up from approximately $10 billion just 14 years ago. That is a 14-fold expansion in a single generation. China's share of ASEAN's total imports surged from 12.4% in 2017 to 17.6% in 2025, while Chinese exports to the US fell 20% over the same period. So, the supply chains are not decoupling from China. They are deepening through China, with Southeast Asia functioning as a geographic relay station rather than a genuine industrial replacement. And China is physically building the infrastructure to accelerate this integration even further. The Pinglu Canal, a 134-kilometre waterway cutting through Guangxi province to the Gulf of Tonkin, is now over 90% complete and scheduled to begin operations in late 2026. It will shorten transport distances by 560 kilometres and save an estimated 5.2 billion yuan annually in logistics costs. When combined with the new international land-sea trade corridor, which already handled 1.425 million container units in 2025, the infrastructure connecting inland China to ASEAN markets is being permanently upgraded. And this begs the question: if China is embedding itself deeper into Southeast Asian manufacturing rather than retreating from it, then what exactly is the region actually building? Well, let's look at the star pupil first. Vietnam is the undisputed winner of the China Plus One migration on paper. Its GDP grew 7.83% in the first quarter of 2026, comfortably ahead of the previous year's pace. On the 7th of April, FTSE Russell officially confirmed Vietnam's upgrade from frontier market to secondary emerging market, effective 21st of September, a decision that could channel between $6 and $8 billion in total foreign capital into Vietnamese equities over the coming years. Samsung formally registered a new legal entity called Samsung Vietnam Semiconductors in Thanh Nguyen province on the 13th of March, with $100 million in initial capital and a phased commitment worth $4 billion, making Vietnam its second major overseas semiconductor hub after China. Samsung's cumulative investment in the country now exceeds $23 billion. Apple, meanwhile, has moved over 40% of MacBook production to Vietnamese factories, with the new MacBook Neo assembled jointly by Quanta and Foxconn at facilities in the country's northern provinces. And Vitel broke ground in January on Vietnam's first domestic semiconductor fab, targeting 32nm chips at Hoa Lac High Tech Park, with trial production expected by the end of 2027. But here is where the picture gets murkier. Bloomberg's analysis of Phucang Technology, a Foxconn subsidiary operating in Vietnam, revealed that the company exported $8.6 billion in MacBooks, iPads, and servers in 2025. It sounds like a massive Vietnamese manufacturing success story until you see that it imported $7.9 billion in components to make those products. Put simply, the net value added inside Vietnam was marginal. The overwhelming majority of the industrial content was Chinese, assembled in Vietnam, and shipped onwards to American consumers. And the problems extend well beyond thin value add. Vietnam faces a potential 46% US tariff rate and is one of 6 ASEAN nations under active Section 301 investigation. Net foreign selling on Vietnamese equities exceeded 32 trillion dong, roughly $1.28 billion in the first quarter alone, despite the FTSE upgrade announcement. The country has set an ambitious target of training 50,000 semiconductor engineers by 2030, but the current shortage of master's and doctoral level engineers, combined with inadequate lab infrastructure, makes that timeline extremely aggressive. And northern Vietnam's proximity to China, which reduces component logistics costs by 20 to 30%, is simultaneously the region's greatest competitive advantage and the clearest evidence of its structural dependency on Chinese inputs. Now, each of the other major Southeast Asian economies is making a distinctly different strategic bet, and each one carries its own version of this same fundamental tension. Malaysia is positioning itself as the semiconductor and AI hub of the region. It ranks 23rd globally in the 2026 Milken Institute Global Opportunity Index, the highest among developing Southeast Asian economies. Semiconductors account for roughly 40% of total exports, and Intel is expanding advanced packaging operations in Penang using cutting-edge EMIB interconnect technology. Meanwhile, a joint venture between South Korea's OCI Tariffs and Japan's Tokuyama Corporation is constructing Southeast Asia's first semiconductor-grade polysilicon plant in Sarawak, backed by a $125 million International Finance Corporation loan, targeting commercial operations by January 2029. And Chinese car giant BYD is opening a 1.3 billion ringgit EV assembly facility in Tanjung Malim in the second half of 2026. But Malaysia's trade minister has also publicly declared the US reciprocal trade agreement null and void after the Supreme Court ruling, a diplomatically aggressive posture that could easily invite retaliation from Washington. Thailand, by contrast, is the weakest link in the chain. GDP growth there is forecast at just 1.3%, according to the World Bank, the worst trajectory in roughly 30 years. Household debt sits at a critical 87 to 90% of GDP, while public debt has hit 65.96%, dangerously close to the 70% statutory ceiling that limits the government's ability to fiscally stimulate its way out of trouble. Every $10 increase in crude oil prices shaves an estimated 0.2 percentage points off Thai GDP growth, and the ongoing Middle East conflict is compounding that energy burden directly. And here's the absurdity of Thailand's position. The Thai Prime Minister is using a BYD Sea Lion 7 as his official government vehicle, while simultaneously trying to position Thailand as a domestic EV manufacturing hub. The country is embracing Chinese brands at the highest symbolic level, while its own manufacturers are being undercut by those exact same brands. Indonesia, meanwhile, is playing the resource card. It produces over 20% of the world's nickel and is trying to climb the value chain from raw ore to finished EV batteries. BYD's Subang factory in West Java, approximately 90% complete as of early April, has 150,000 unit annual capacity and roughly $1 billion of committed investment. CATL's Dragon Consortium with state mining company Antam is targeting commercial battery production from its Karawang facility by late July 2026. But it's not as rosy for Indonesia as it sounds. Chinese firms control roughly 70% of the country's nickel refining capacity. Each ton of battery-grade nickel generates 93 tons of CO2, according to Indonesia's own national planning agency, Bappenas. The industry runs on 11.6 gigawatts of captive coal-fired power, with another 5.5 gigawatts under construction. So, it's a dirty business to be in. And despite being the world's largest nickel producer, Indonesia still accounts for less than 1% of global EV battery production. The actual value transformation is happening elsewhere, predominantly in China, South Korea, and Japan. And this brings us to the structural threat that could reprice the entire Southeast Asian manufacturing thesis overnight, because the United States has decided that much of this industrial migration is not what it appears to be. But before we dig into that, if you want to stay ahead of these massive geopolitical shifts and understand exactly how they transmit into your portfolio and your cost of living, then you should be reading the Coin Bureau Finance newsletter. It's absolutely free, and we break down everything regarding global trade architecture, commodity markets, macroeconomic transition, and monetary policy so that you never miss what truly matters. Just click the link in the description or scan this QR code on your screen. And now, back to the legal earthquake that just shattered the foundation of America's trade war architecture. So, on the 20th of February 2026, the United States Supreme Court ruled that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act does not authorize the president to impose tariffs. This single judicial decision instantly invalidated the legal basis for much of the existing trade war structure. The Trump administration scrambled to implement temporary replacement duties under Section 122, a rarely used balance of payments provision that authorizes a 10% global import surcharge. But Section 122 has a hard expiration date, the 24th of July 2026. That is the ticking clock hanging over every factory being built, every FDI commitment being negotiated, and every supply chain being rerouted through Southeast Asia right now. To construct a legally durable tariff framework before that deadline expires, the United States Trade Representative, or USTR, launched two massive Section 301 investigations in March. The first covers 16 economies, including 6 Southeast Asian nations: Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam, targeting what the USTR calls structural excess manufacturing capacity across electronics, automobiles, metals, and rubber products. The second investigation covers 60 economies on forced labor enforcement. Public hearings are scheduled for late April through early May, with the administration aiming to impose new tariff remedies before the July expiration. Now, the core accusation driving these investigations is transshipment. Think of transshipment as industrial laundering. Chinese goods enter Southeast Asian factories, receive minimal processing, exit with a new country of origin label, and arrive at American ports as though they were genuinely manufactured in Vietnam or Malaysia or wherever. Academic research estimates this kind of rerouting accounts for roughly 12% of total US imports from ASEAN. But here's the statistic that has Washington's attention. ASEAN countries have offset approximately 55% of the decline in China's direct US import share. To American trade officials, that gap between China's losses and ASEAN's gains is not a coincidence, but rather evidence of a systematic circumvention of the tariff regime. Indonesia actually signed an agreement on reciprocal trade with the US in February that included specific penalty tariffs for transshipment and commitments to restrict excess production by foreign-owned mineral processing facilities. But after the Supreme Court ruling pulled the legal floor out from under the entire arrangement, Jakarta paused ratification to reassess whether the deal they signed even applies anymore. The entire trade architecture is simultaneously under construction and under demolition. And this legal chaos has created the most counterintuitive geopolitical outcome of the entire trade war era, because the region America is counting on to reduce Chinese dependency is rapidly becoming more Chinese-aligned, not less. The 2026 ISEAS survey, published on the 7th of April by the Yusof Ishak Institute, surveyed over 2,000 regional opinion leaders across Southeast Asia between January and February. For the first time, 52% of respondents said they would align with China over the United States if forced to choose, reversing the American lead from the previous year. US leadership has become the region's single greatest geopolitical concern, cited by 51.9% of respondents, surpassing even the South China Sea territorial disputes. Confidence in the US to champion global free trade has collapsed to just 14.8%. And pessimism regarding US relations has nearly doubled in a single year, rising from 14.2% to 29.5%. The Council on Foreign Relations published an analysis on the 9th of April arguing that US trade policy, combined with the Iran conflict, is actively pushing Southeast Asia towards Beijing. That analysis noted that the unpredictability of American foreign policy is driving regional leaders to view China as a more stable, if complex, partner. And as you can probably imagine, China is leaning into this opening aggressively. The 15th five-year plan, approved by the National People's Congress in March, explicitly aligns Chinese AI, green energy, and digital infrastructure cooperation with ASEAN development priorities. Guangxi Province has been designated as a dedicated hub for AI technology integration targeting ASEAN markets. The China-ASEAN Free Trade Agreement 3.0 was signed in October 2025, deepening the institutional architecture of the trade relationship. And the political alignment extends into multilateral institutions. Indonesia joined the BRICS group of nations as a full member in January 2025, making it the first Southeast Asian nation to do so. Malaysia and Thailand became partner countries following the Kazan summit in October 2024. Meanwhile, Vietnam accepted its BRICS partner invitation in June 2025. Now, the irony here is stark and structurally significant. The US is simultaneously trying to build Southeast Asia into a manufacturing counterweight to China while imposing tariffs on those very same countries, investigating them for transshipment fraud, and watching their diplomatic allegiance drift towards Beijing in real time. This is a measurable contradiction, and the data confirms it is accelerating. So, what does this geopolitical collision actually mean for your money? Well, Vietnam's FTSE Russell upgrade creates a concrete investment catalyst with a specific timeline. Passive ETF inflows of $1 to $1.67 billion are projected to begin in September, with the 32 eligible stocks published on the 21st of August. The VN index surged approximately 4.7% on the 8th of April, the day after the announcement. But that upgrade is priced against severe headwinds. The Section 301 investigation risk, persistent net foreign selling throughout the first quarter, and the 24th of July tariff deadline all create a gauntlet of uncertainty between now and the September implementation date. The window between these two events, roughly 8 weeks, is a period of maximum legal and geopolitical ambiguity that will either validate or fundamentally reprice the entire Vietnamese equity thesis. Elsewhere, Indonesia's nickel-to-battery investment case faces what amounts to a clean nickel paradox. The country's nickel is physically essential for global EV supply chains, but the overwhelming Chinese ownership of refining capacity means Indonesian nickel struggles to qualify under the US Inflation Reduction Act's Foreign Entity of Concern restrictions. And it faces similar compliance barriers under the EU battery passport's traceability requirements. A two-tier market is emerging where clean nickel, meaning nickel processed outside Chinese-dominated supply chains, commands a premium, while Indonesian nickel gets relegated to China-facing or cost-competitive markets exclusively. And here's the structural pressure that makes Indonesia's entire value proposition even more precarious. LFP batteries, lithium iron phosphate chemistry that requires absolutely no nickel whatsoever, now account for over 60% of the global EV battery market. LFP pack prices have fallen to approximately $81 per kilowatt-hour versus $128 for nickel-containing NMC packs, a cost differential of roughly 37%. Over 90% of the electric vehicles sold inside Indonesia itself in 2025 used LFP batteries, meaning the country whose entire industrial strategy is built around nickel is now buying nickel-free batteries for its own domestic fleet. And CATL's sodium-ion Naxtra technology, which also requires no nickel, is targeting large-scale commercial deployment by the end of this year. Indonesia is building a multi-billion-dollar commodity strategy around a material that's facing demand erosion from two distinct chemical alternatives simultaneously. For individual companies and ETFs with heavy Southeast Asian exposure, the critical question is no longer whether the region grows. The manufacturing migration is physically real. Factories are being built, FDI is flowing, and export volumes are climbing. The question, though, is whether that growth survives the legal and geopolitical gauntlet between now and late 2026. If the Section 301 investigations produce aggressive tariff remedies before the 24th of July, the entire Southeast Asian manufacturing thesis gets repriced overnight. If the transition from Section 122 to a new legal framework is messy or delayed, the uncertainty alone could freeze corporate FDI decisions for multiple quarters. And frozen investment in a region that is simultaneously being courted by China and investigated by the United States is not a neutral outcome. It's a structural accelerant pushing the region further into Beijing's economic orbit. The era of Southeast Asia serving as an uncomplicated hedge against Chinese supply chain concentration is over. The region is not becoming the new factory of the world. It's becoming the world's most contested factory floor. Three structural realities now define this landscape permanently. China is not being replaced. It's repositioning itself as the supplier behind the suppliers, with the Pinglu Canal and trade corridor purpose-built to make that integration irreversible. The US is pursuing fundamentally contradictory policies, meanwhile, building Southeast Asia up as a China counterweight while tearing it down with tariffs and transshipment investigations, measurably pushing the region towards Beijing. And the legal framework is in flux. A Supreme Court ruling invalidated the original tariff basis, a temporary replacement expires on the 24th of July, and Section 301 hearings are racing to build something durable before the clock runs out. The optimistic case, Vietnam's semiconductors, Malaysia's chips, and Indonesia's battery supply chain, is backed by real industrial commitment and real capital. But the pessimistic case is equally credible. Much of this boom is trade war rerouting, and the US crackdown will expose how thin the local value add really is. The 24th of July is the date that determines which case prevails. So, will Southeast Asia build genuine industrial capacity that survives the tariff gauntlet, or will the crackdown expose the region as little more than a relay station for Chinese manufacturing? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you want to understand how China's rare earth dominance is creating a permanent geopolitical choke point over Western technology supply chains, then check out the video right over here. That's all from me for today though, so thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Guy, signing off.